RPG Lessons Learned. When the game is over, when your players are gone, that's when lessons are learned. Find us online at rpgllpodcast.com, email us at rpgllpodcast@gmail.com, and find us on Blue Sky at rpgll. Hi, welcome to RPG Lessons Learned, the show where you can learn from our mistakes. I'm Dusty, and with me, as usual, is Tanner. Hi, Tanner.
Hey, Dusty. How you been?
You know, I can't complain. It's been a week, nearly to the minute, since we played the game we're about to talk about.
Yeah, we went back to the Carnival of Crime and Mutants and Masterminds.
We did. Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. This is our second game in the Carnival of Crime. Technically our third game overall, if you can call that one brief quick start encounter a game, which I'll liberally do.
Yeah, it counts.
But we played in something that you're very comfortable in, that I am not in the slightest bit comfortable in. God, the grammar on that sentence is terrible, but whatever, let's leave it in. Roll20.
Yeah, I have played a lot of Roll20. I just pulled it up. I have 1,062 hours in Roll20 on my account.
Ooh, so, should I pull up mine for a comparison?
Yeah, I bet it's gonna be like 9 or whatever.
It's gonna be tiny. Like maybe I left Roll20 on one day. Where do you see the number of hours that you have?
It's just on like the top right, I think, when you look on roll20.net/welcome, it has like your little name.
19.
19. Okay, that's more than I thought. Yeah, what'd you think? Roll20. It's a, for those who don't know, it's probably the premier virtual tabletop tool for role-playing games, and it has a lot of flexibility in terms of like setting up a virtual tabletop for you and your buddies to play with. But like any tool, it's got a lot of options. Did you find all that overwhelming, or was it kind of easy to get rocking and rolling with it?
I think it was easy, but I think it was easy because we really only wanted to use it for the character sheets.
It's true.
Those of you who were around for the last episode might remember we talked and gave Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition a bit of a hard time for how the math works, where you have these defenses on your character sheet, and you have to remember to add 10 to them to set your DC for being hit. And it's like, why do I have to remember to add 10? Why can't the character sheet just add the 10? And then you got to add 15 to the damage rank of attacks. It's like, why do I have to do that? Why can't the damage rank of the attack just already include the 15? Why are we mathing both the dice roll and the bonuses and the DC and these random 10s and 15s? And all that mathing led Tanner to say, Dusty, you might find this a lot easier if we do it in Roll20. And by God, I did.
Yeah, community members on Roll20, there's a lot of like pre-made like character sheets that do all the math for you that people have made. And I guess bigger name publishers are starting to actually support kind of Roll20 stuff like that themselves as they go. So yeah, so it becomes as simple as me just like clicking on a power on my character sheet, and then in the chat room, in the chat log, it like rolls my power, it shows me what the roll is, it names the power, and yeah, it's just simple once you get it set up.
Yeah, and toughness rolls took bruises into account. That was great. Successful attack rolls, just actually all attack rolls, successful or not, just showed the DC for the toughness roll. It did make the back and forth mathing a lot easier to manage.
Do you feel, I know that we don't think that, at least I don't think that Roll20 is required for me to have fun with Mutants and Masterminds. I don't think you do either, but do you think the fact that this game was so smoothed over by Roll20 math, is that a ding to the system?
A little bit I do, yeah. But part of that is I'm becoming, I don't want to say a curmudgeon. I'm just getting to where I like things that are a little bit lighter on the rules. And I don't mean rules light all the way. I just mean I don't want math on both the GM side and the player side of a single die roll.
Yeah, I think that preference, because I definitely didn't used to be afraid of like crunchy games, but I think the more games I played, the less time I spent with a one given system, and the more I appreciated rules light games that allow you to kind of hop in and out. Like, I think if we were a home group and we were playing Mutants and Masterminds for 15 sessions, I don't think it would bother us nearly as much, like as opposed to us like kind of dipping our toes in these waters for 3 sessions. Like having something to kind of just do the math for us is nicer.
I remember in the early days of 5e when Chris Perkins would talk about, just static damage. And in fact, in 5e, one of the options was just static damage for a lot of the monster attacks. And I remember feeling some kind of way about that. Like I really felt like that cheated the players of the possibility of the monster rolling a 1 and not killing them if they had 5 hit points versus the average being a 6, and it automatically kills the player. So I just felt really terrible. Like, we should always roll damage. But then we played Scarlet Heroes.
Yeah.
Where you kind of roll damage, but you run it through a table.
Yeah.
And the damage number can be a lot lower. And man, that just worked. It worked unbelievably well. I think the more you're exposed to more mechanics, the more you see that there are really neat and elegant ways to handle damage and damage ranks and all that stuff without having to resort to crunchy math.
Yeah, and games are even taking that a little bit further. There's an OSR game, I believe it's called Into the Odd is the one that's doing this, or at least there's one semi-prominent OSR game that doesn't have attack rolls. You just walk up to something and boom, you do damage. So like, I think that there's definitely a desire to remove the number of rolls and the amount of arithmetic in between like you declaring something happening and an effect happening at the table,
We're doing the thing where we're a show about feedback and we're a show about lessons learned, so we tend to sound negative. We had a ton of fun with this game, and I think I'm hugely appreciating what Mutants and Masterminds is trying to do. And I have to say, the feeling at the table is a very comic book feeling. The game wildly succeeds, but we said something as we parted ways last week that I really want to repeat on the show. I don't remember which one of us it was. I think it may have been you. We said, Mutants and Masterminds is technically a game system, but it's really a very robust character creation system that has a game system tacked onto it.
Yeah, I think if you were to rewrite the core, you could fit the core like rules and interactions of this game on like 2 sheets of paper easily. Like just like what damage values are, what each stat does, like the interactions. But then it's a lot of customization of powers. What do those powers do? What's the magnitude of those powers? And then like constructing characters. And like you said, it seems like a lot of the online content for this game, as you've been digging into, is a lot of like, how do I make Darth Vader in Mutants and Masterminds or something like that? You know what I mean? People like making characters. I mean, that's a thing that people love about RPGs. So it doesn't surprise me that that's what's like online. But yeah, it definitely seems like if that's what you want to do, this is the system for it,
Question. You mentioned a friend of yours plays Mutants and Masterminds, like GMs it, and pretty frequently, I gather. Is this a game that you think you'd want to pursue more when we finish this little trilogy, or do you think you'll leave it behind?
If I had a GM who had run a ton of it and was passionate about it, I would play more, definitely. If that friend of mine was like, hey, Tanner, we're gonna do a campaign that's gonna be 10 sessions, let's make some characters and we'll play. Like, yeah, I'd be down for that. I don't know if I would ever seek this game out again on my own, you know what I mean? But I wouldn't say no if it was offered.
The main guy behind Mutants and Masterminds, and his game's a hell of a lot cooler than mine, which doesn't exist. His game exists and is very good. Steve Kenson. He did another game under the Green Ronin banner called Icons.
I have heard of that.
Yeah, I've got the hardcover rulebook, and I did a bundle of holding for Icons some time ago. Actually, several, I think. I'm interested to play another game by the same designer that does seem to be a lot more rules light. So when I revisit superhero games in the future, Tanner, I think I might ask you if you're interested in another game by the same designer.
I'd love that. Sounds fascinating. Like both from a kind of like dorky, like evolution of RPGs kind of thing, and also like if it's a more rules light kind of supers game, like that sounds like a cool contrast too.
Cool. So I changed my prep up this time. My prep was largely in Roll20 now. Like I did a lot to move my NPCs, my villains into Roll20. That's part of it, which meant I had a lot less to prep in the document on paper to actually quote unquote write my adventure. But none of that was the bulk of my prep. The bulk of my prep, exiting our first game, heading into our second game, I really felt like I needed to read more comics. And I cracked out my collection of trade paperbacks and graphic novels, and I read a ton of comics, especially Batman comics, between our two games. I wish I had more X-Men stuff that I could have read for kind of the teenage angle, since your character is a teenager. But did that show at all? Could you tell? I didn't mention to you that I read comics. Did the game feel different because of that?
First off, I just want to say, excellent way to prep. Just sounds like it was a ton of fun. Like it's a great way to prep. Yeah, I feel like we felt the setting a little bit more. I could tell that, especially when we kind of got to the villain and the motivation, like that felt very, I don't want to say real, but it felt like that's something I could have read in a comic. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of that stuff felt a lot more well realized than I think was kind of the sketch of what the world was in the first session. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I would have attributed that to be like, oh, clearly Dusty read a lot of comics. It felt like you were getting in more of a groove with this one, and it seems like that was the reason why in retrospect.
Yeah, I really wanted to give the villain good motivation. I've seen and read repeatedly, good villains make good stories, good villains make good stories, and that's especially true for a system like Mutants and Masterminds, where their villain creation uses the exact same rules as hero creation.
And especially given the genre, right? Like, obviously it's been said a million times, but like the Batman is nothing without the Joker, right? Like these villains, and I'm not going to say that my character and the villain of this game are, that intertwined. We haven't had 90 years of comic history to get there, but like there is something to be said, even more than like a D&D game. Like a good villain is required to make a good Mutants and Masterminds or good superhero game, I'll say.
I do worry that I made a mistake with all my prep. I did a lot of, a scene is winding down, you've overcome some challenge, and then boom, I introduced a new challenge. And I did that because it felt very comic booky.
Right.
Like, you've subdued these guys, you've tied them up, you've knocked them out, whatever. Boom. Something else happens. You've dealt with this person. These other guys are coming at you in the park. And in the moment, I felt really good about it. And I felt like it was really organic. And then I don't know if you could tell this happened, but we got about 3/4 or maybe 2/3 of the way through the game. And all of a sudden I was like, oh no, I'm railroading. I just had this realization of like, oh my God, I really felt like I was doing this cool organic scene to scene thing. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not giving him enough choice. I'm railroading. Was I railroading or was it the organic thing?
So I think railroading is like the explicit denial of a player's choices in order to get you on track or on whatever track that you've decided. So I feel like railroading would be if I decided to, for some reason, to go and investigate something else, and then it ended up being like the whole quantum ogre thing. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah, I think we talked about it.
Oh yeah, so like the idea that like if there's a left path and a right path in a dungeon, the GM prepared an ogre, so whichever one you take, the ogre will be there. Like the idea that, whatever path I take doesn't actually matter and it's not actually choices. No, I don't think you were railroading, or if you were, maybe I'm just like totally fine with it. No, I really don't think you were though. But like you said, I think there's a fine line between railroading and pacing, right? And like you weren't ever explicitly denying any decision I made. And in fact, you let me make a pretty big decision at the end. So I don't think it counts as railroading. I think it's linear for sure. And I've run lots of linear games. Like I've run wide open games and I've run very linear games. Like I feel like high stakes games, like story based games, tend to be linear in prep. And I think it can be I think it's an advanced GM skill to prepare a linear adventure that isn't railroading. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I think it's very easy if you're a new GM to think of a linear adventure as this happens and then this happens and then this happens. But I haven't looked at your prep, but I don't think your prep was written that way, and I don't think that it was intended to be that way. It's like you weren't declaring what happened. You were at the end of a encounter, you were presenting me with a new problem, and it made most sense for me to deal with that problem. But like, you never denied me trying to do something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the prep was branching. So I showed you my prep the first time where it had kind of like a comic book, like was Sunday comics layout where you could move from top to the bottom and you could go from like different place to different place. I did kind of a dungeon layout for our first adventure. I did the same thing here. There was a branching layout, and I was actually picking branches for what happens based on choices you had made, like during the prior combat. Like, you were really loud, they heard you, or you took this approach when you walked up to Bubbles. And I should probably explain who Bubbles is. Like, we should probably have a moment where I describe the adventure a little bit. In fact, let's do that now, because I want to talk about Act 2. This was a trilogy of games explicitly. My original idea for the session, Tanner, was this, and then you can see how far you deviated from it. And also, all listeners, this will tell you a little bit about our campaign. Your young, teenage, social media savvy superhero was meant to be attacked in his lair, although the villains would not know who you were. Mm-hmm. If they attacked and you were in your costume, they'd be like, oh my God, he's here in his friend's apartment. And if you weren't in costume, they'd be like, there's his friend. Now we can draw him out of hiding. In the same way that I feel like the Batcave gets invaded and no one figures out that it's under Bruce Wayne's house. And what I really wanted to do is start with the invasion of your lair, which we did. And I wanted to chase you for the entire rest of the game. Mm-hmm. And I wanted you to be like ducking and running. And I wanted there to be a moment where you turn the tables. And then I wanted you to overcome and like meet the main villain. And that was my structure. I'll keep going. You know this part, Tanner, but for the listeners, the Carnival of Crime are kind of a circus performer based coterie of villains led by Maestro Max, who has the ability to give other people superpowers. And some of his helpers are Grillmaster Gus, mm-hmm. who sells hot dogs and is very much a brute type character. Bubbles the Gigglemeister.
Yep, your Harley Quinn, great value brand Harley Quinn.
I love that you called her low rent Harley Quinn. Yes, that's a pretty good description for her, although she has more of a Southern accent than whatever accent Harley Quinn has.
Yeah, completely different.
I can't tell if you're being serious or sarcastic. Love it either way. There's Cyberclown, and now Cyberclown 2.0.
2000.
Yeah, 2000, that's right. Cyberclown 2000. So, and then also various mimes, like you fought a lot of mimes as the minions last time, and clowns that were a little beefier as minions this time. But it's really based around this whole, like, people you might encounter at a circus. So that was my original layout. Unfortunately for me, you used the power and did the turn of the tables immediately in the very first fight as soon as they invaded your apartment, which I then had to roll with, which I felt okay about. But it didn't achieve what I wanted, which was the darker chapter in the trilogy, right, where you're on the run. How do you feel about Act 2 and how this worked out?
I think that you are correct in that, because I never really got that sensation of being on the run. I got the Act 2. And by the way, when we say things like Act 1, Act 2, we're assuming a 3-act structure, right? Not like a Shakespearean 5-act structure or like a Japanese 4-act structure, right? We're assuming a 3-act structure. So like, I did feel like the stakes were higher. I did feel like there was more tension and I was coming to a better understanding of what was going on. And there was a great turning point at the end of Act 2, which I feel like there should be, whether it's a climax or an inversion of expectations or whatever you think it is. But the whole like Empire Strikes Back, like you are on the back foot the whole time. I don't know. I felt pretty capable the whole time. Like, those guys invaded my secret lair, aka my character's apartment, and I just flash froze them all. And then Bubbles, when I met up with her, she made some insinuation that she kind of knows where I stay now, or she knows where my lair is, even if I'm not who she thinks I am. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just freeze you and then get what information I need to go on. And like, I'll say it, I don't think you succeeded on the being on the back foot on the run the whole time. I do think we succeeded on making a good Act 2, though.
If not being on the back foot, what's the hallmark of an Act 2 that you think we did succeed at?
like I said, I think it was the raising of stakes. Like I know that my home base is not safe. The villains can get me there. I love that they're not passive villains. They're like out doing stuff and trying to get stuff done. And I have to thrust myself in the way of that. You know what I mean? Like that feels proper super heroic. Like the villains have a scheme and the hero is there to thwart them. So like that was way bigger of a part this time. And then yeah, I guess maybe should we talk about the wrench I threw in at the end?
Sure. Yeah. Before you do that, I will say I'm glad you picked up. They had an agenda. One of the things I wrote down for myself as far as how I wanted to have a different tone, I did not want the adventure to be you traveling to a discrete location and defeating enemies in that discrete location, i.e., a dungeon crawl.
Yes.
I really wanted it to be all over the place and even in some cases like coming at you in the way that comic books feel.
I think you succeeded in that because there was that great skill challenge when I was escaping Cyberclown and then we had like a cool cinematic moment where I like caught a bus and then like made my way to the final part of the adventure, which I came face to face with the villain and then agreed to work with him.
That was the twist that I didn't see coming.
I didn't
gave
either.
the villain, I tried to give him a great backstory. I tried to make him this, you and I are both, you're in your 30s, I'm in my 40s. You and I are both older, established in our careers, shall we say. And we remember what it was like to be Ice Flow. We both remember what it's like to be a 23-year-old with the whole world in front of you and no idea what you want to do, but confident you can do it. We both remember what that was like. And I really wanted to have Maestro Max speak as an older man and say, you have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what I'm up against. And ultimately, he's trying to take down this mega corporation. And my thought process was, let's have him be an ends justify the means kind of guy, which we both agree is reprehensible. But let's also have him trying to take down something that is also bad, equally bad, if not worse than him. And I did not anticipate your own, shall I say, anarchist tendencies.
Anti-authoritarian, maybe.
Anti-authoritarian is probably better. Yes.
Anti-corporate
to pop out and for you to be like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah.
That shocked me. What did you think?
Yeah, I told you like right after we finished, I'm like, damn, you made this villain too sympathetic, Dusty. Because his whole thing was that his family was tragically killed by an industrial accident that he ascribed to basically the privatization of city services. He made a very impassioned speech about this corporation and how they're getting in different parts of the city and privatizing things that should be public services and making them worse, which, maybe that sounds a little familiar, dear listener. And yeah, like my characters, we didn't really like talk about my character's backstory too much, but like in my head, I always had it that he came from kind of a disadvantaged background. And I think that thing, like that aspect specifically, like would have spoken to him. That's not something that me, Tanner, necessarily like reflects. I don't think that, I didn't hate corporations until I became an adult. And maybe, my character Ice Flow, Darius Hughes would have that from kind of a younger age. But I'm glad that it's something that, when I ran the L5R Holy Matrimony, you were really impressed when I brought out a detail in the game that related to your character's backstory. And I think the same thing happened here. Like you didn't know that that's necessarily what my character's backstory was. That was in my head, but the details you gave, they touched on that. And I'm like, you know what? I can't see Darius listening to what this guy had to say and then turning around and deciding that he was still the bad guy and had to be taken down in defense of this corporation. Like that felt wrong to me. So I switched sides. I'm more surprised that you didn't see that as a possibility at all.
I really didn't. I really thought when I threw in the part about the ends justifying the means, that would be all you would need to be like, you're still doing it wrong. I'm still going to fight you.
It was close, but yeah, we play to find out what happens, don't we?
Right? We do. And I love this. I love that I left the game with you a week ago today with no idea now what Act 3 is going to look like. Like I've got a lot to figure out about Act 3. Now we kind of agreed on, maybe a heist, maybe you're working together to take down the ARC Corporation. By the way, the Carnival of Crime, the Arc Corporation. These are all allusions to a very little known intellectual property that some listeners might have clued into immediately as soon as they heard Carnival of Crime. And you could certainly Google and find it, Tanner, but I would say wait till after the next session if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I really didn't see it coming, and I'm delighted. I'm delighted with how do I tonally play, and like I don't know the answers to these, so I can propose these questions, and I'm thinking about it, but there'll be no spoilers for the session. Do I have you do this heist with Max, and do I have him like go way overboard and try to make you squeamish about your chosen allyship? Do I make Max where he even can be redeemed? Do I make it where you could redeem him? Do I open it up with like you're trying to do a good thing and redemption is even possible if you help him achieve his goal? And then there's so many places I could take this. The ground feels fertile and rich.
And exciting, I hope.
And exciting. And it's exciting for me as a GM. And this is why I GM.
Well, it's great to hear that, honestly, like that's probably the best compliment a player can get is saying, yeah, the choice you made is this is why I GM. So I'll thank you for that.
Absolutely. Let's do ratings real quick. So I like doing ratings at the end. We should consider that. How would you rate this game, say 1 to 10?
I'm a 5 average kind of guy. Some people say 7 average. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I would say this is like an 8.5 out of 10. I think that it was mostly excellent. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, I don't know if you really instilled what you aimed to do in terms of the on the run thing, but it still felt like a really great act 2 for a story, and the ending and what we did there really elevated it for me.
Question. Are you a 10% of all your sessions are a 10 kind of guy when you think about rating things 10, or are you a 10 is like unobtainable?
No, 10 is obtainable, but it's one of those things where I know it when I see it, and if I have to think about whether something was a 10 out of 10, it probably wasn't, And I don't mean 10 either to be that like this is perfect. This is just like this is the best we can reasonably get is like a 10 out of 10 session. I've had probably 3 or 4 of those in my life.
So I'm gonna say you're a bell curve.
Yes.
10 kind of guy.
Yeah, for sure. Most games are in a 4 to 6 ratio. 4 to 6 range.
So I feel really good about that 8.5.
Yeah.
And I don't GM often enough, unfortunately. Like gaming is still a part of my life. Like I still play. You and I go back and forth, but unfortunately with holidays and then people being sick, et cetera,
it's less of a part of our lives than it was 5 years ago. I think
it really is.
It's sad, but I'm glad we're doing what we can to do it. But yeah, I think what you're getting at is that GMing is a muscle, man. Like the more you work on it, the better you are. I think it's really hard to take lessons from a game and then sit for 2 months and then play another game, which is nice that we get to unpack our lessons in this show. So in detail, that helps a lot. But if you were running a game every week, your games would get either really good really fast or really bad really fast if you felt too pressured or whatever that timetable is for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think every 2 weeks is perfect for me.
That's where I'm at too. Like every other week, that's when I felt like I was on the ball. I like the juices were flowing. I was on my game the whole time. Not to say that there weren't challenges, but like it's a muscle and you got to exercise it.
It is. And again, I'm going to compliment the system. Like we spent the first part like criticizing the system, and I think the criticism is valid. I don't back away from any of it. But every moment of this game felt like a comic book. And I'll give myself credit for some of the things that I did to prep the adventure and to prep the villains, but also the system. Like Tanner, I believe you did come pretty close. Like you were dazed a couple of times, and did you move? What's the one beyond dazed where you're almost incapacitated?
Yeah, I forget. Staggered.
Yeah, I think you did get to staggered at one point.
I did, yeah.
So I think the combats feel really comic booky, and it feels like you could get incapacitated at the drop of a hat. So mostly, I compliment Mutants and Masterminds for what it does achieve, which is a very comic book feeling game.
And I'll say maybe this is just the way my character is built and things like that. But like in Savage Worlds, for example, which we talked about last time, the fact that there was a to hit roll and then a roll to resist the damage of the hit you just took meant that fights could be a slog. They could be so grindy, but this does not feel like that, despite it having the same kind of design philosophy. I never felt like this turn is going to end up the same way next turn is. You know what I mean? Like, things are hurtling towards a conclusion, and I was doing my best to stay on top of it. You know what I mean? And we were interjecting with like comic book style descriptions every turn. We were making things up on the fly. I use like that blizzard power to kind of obscure us. And you're like, okay, Tanner, the guys who are coming after you, you know, they're going to be here in 1d4 turns. And we're going to do that. And like, you were making all that up on the fly. And that felt great. It felt like my choices were being respected and had impact. It felt great.
I agree. All right, let's do lessons learned.
Sure. Lesson learned number 1 for anybody out there: don't be afraid to try new digital tools for your games. We shifted to Roll20 for this one. I assume we're going to be in Roll20 for part 3 as well.
We are.
Yeah, so it can be intimidating. It can be a learning curve, but Roll20 has been out for a decade at this point or more. And so there's plenty of resources online and on the website to get up to speed with it if you're afraid. And yeah, it made this game better.
And I have to compliment the video and voice chat.
Yes, great point.
I wasn't expecting a lot. Oh my God, the video and voice chat was just as good as Google Meets, just as good as Zoom, just as good as Teams that I use at work. It was excellent.
Yeah, and I felt like I was psyching you out because I'm like, oh man, Dusty, last time I tried video and voice chat, it was pretty bad. But I think given world events, I think video and voice chat has gotten pretty much better everywhere over the past couple years. So thumbs up to Roll20 for fixing that. It's awesome now.
Absolutely. So lesson learned number 2, let players throw you curveballs. You entered this lesson learned into our notes, and I fully agree with it. Like, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel off balance. I felt excited when you were like, I think I'm going to join them. And I was like, literally thrilled. Like, oh my God, what's that going to do to our game? This is awesome.
And part of that is keeping your prep nimble, right? Like, we knew this was going to be a 3-part game. You did not prepare parts 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. You're doing them one at a time, and that's the way to do it. Because, man, having to throw out a whole adventure that you wrote because I decided to make a different decision, that'd be painful. But you didn't have to do it because you didn't prepare that adventure yet. And then, lesson learned number 3: think about story structure in your games. We've said before that when we were talking about mysteries, that RPGs are kind of messy story-wise, right? Like, they're not scripted. You can't necessarily assume that A will lead to B will lead to C. But in terms of like a campaign, I think it helps to think about arcs, and it helps to think about how you frame your adventure. And like, at least if, you know, anything can happen at the table, we play to find out what happens. But you as the GM, and Dusty, you did this, you can come to the table preparing the toolbox for what an act 2 of a story is. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot. You didn't force it, but you know what? Your prep was good enough that when I followed it, it became that.
Absolutely. This is a fun game. I'm looking forward to finishing up and then dissecting part 3.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing. Awesome. I want to get back to it.
Same. All right. Thank you for listening. People call them reviews, postmortems, retrospectives. We call them lessons learned, and we're sharing ours with you.